Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a demo, so this will be another code lab that I follow through with you, where you go ahead and you use Cloud Build to basically build up a Docker image and then deploy it with Cloud Run. Now what this is going to be doing is really showing you some of the automation tools that we can use, and if you are familiar with, say, building Docker images, you will feel right at home here. If you have no idea how to build a Docker image, I would highly recommend you look at some of the Docker Compose files as we go along the way, because really it's not all that bad. Um, if you haven't ever played with this type of an environment before, basically you're making like a small scale virtual machine without the nice hypervisor layer that makes it a virtual machine. You're just creating a sandboxed application type environment. And we're going to be using this to build up a deployable website that really you could, in theory, deploy anywhere. So I will put the link to the code lab in the description below, and I need to make sure that I save this off, otherwise I will forget. Okay, sorry about that. So what I have done so far is in my Cloud Console here on the right, I have enabled Cloud Build and Cloud Run. Cloud Run is not a specific web page, or sorry, a specific page in the console that you go to. You have to go to APIs and services and then enable it. And with this one in particular, I'm going to be just deleting this project when I'm done to clean it up. Now they tell you how to use the container delete commands and the build delete and the services, sorry, the cloud run services delete. I'm just going to delete the whole thing because I've been having a heck of a time keeping my credits topped up this semester. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Now, first things first, we need to make this like that so that we can actually see our Cloud Shell. Now, I've already cloned this thing down multiple times, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again just to really demonstrate. Again, this is a publicly accessible repository here, and I'm going to say make a directory, GCP temp, and I'm going to clone it in here. So that's going to clone down. We get our folder. So this is basically up on GitHub. If I were to go, oops, I don't want the entire Git clone. I just want the link. You would see basically everything that's publicly available up on GitHub. Nope, not an officially supported Google project. Aha. This has a lot of information in it. This is something that we have kept coming back to throughout the class so far. So let's go ahead and set things up. And what this will do, again, if you've seen this already, feel free to put me at 1.999 speed and have me zip through this. We're just installing the Node.js packages with the npm manager. So if we, this shouldn't take too long. The React may take a little bit longer. But what's going to happen here is that we're just going to deploy a local instance, which is basically a developer version of this particular server, not something for long-term use, but we want to make sure that it is working. And again, if you're seeing this lab after you've gone through the microservices aspect, you have played around with this before, but we're just using the monolith aspect right now. We don't care about the microservices for this particular example. So this will take a moment. I will see you in a few. And that was instantaneous. So much so I don't even think I needed to cut. But let's go into the monolith folder and make sure this thing works. So npm start is how we're going to get things running. We need to click this little web preview tab, and we're just going to see our preview. And here is our fancy store. How neat. So we can close this off. We don't need this anymore. Now we are going to turn this into a Docker image. And Docker is a container engine. Depending on when you are viewing this video, Docker support in Kubernetes at least is kind of being pushed onto Docker's shoulders. So keep that in mind if you're going the K8s route. But Cloud Build we already should have enabled, but just for funsies, we'll put that in there anyway. I assume it's already built, so we should be good. Or it's already enabled. Okay, so what we have to do is let's start the build process. So I'm going to copy this and we'll explain it here. and again, if you did the microservices lab, you have run this command before. We're going to submit our current project to Cloud Build, and we're going to tag it gcr.io /our project ID /monolith and a version number. Now what this is doing is it is taking our project and it's running through Cloud Build, and it's actually going to go up onto effectively what is like a Docker repository. You know, you can pull from Docker's images, right? You know, you can do a Docker build and a Docker push. Again, if you're familiar with Docker, if you're not, think of it like an app store for Docker images or a GitHub for Docker images. We're doing the same thing here, except it's hosted by Google. So we're going to go ahead and submit this to Cloud Build. And this one does take a moment, so I will be back in a sec. It didn't take as long as it has for me in the past. It was only about 2 minutes or so. What I did in the meantime was I went over to the Cloud Build page and I went to just kind of see what's going on here. So by going to Cloud Build directly, it takes you right into the history, at least it did for me. And I see my build here. So I actually can kind of see the first, several hex digits, and it actually kind of matches up with what I see here. You get basically get a big GUID identifying this build. If I click it, let's make this bigger, I can basically see everything I want to about this build. I can see the storage bucket that it has been placed in, and the fact that it's actually an archive, a zipped archive at that. I can see the log of the build, and this is everything that we saw in the terminal kind of zipping by. But if I needed to say go in and check what went wrong with the build, I would get the exact info that I need here. I get some execution details, so I get, again, the build ID is important to make note of. Source if I need it, the public image if I need it, so you see this gcr.io, Frederick 680, monolith 1.0.0, so that's our public image. If I click on this, it's going to try to open it up, and it's not going to take us to the actual website, but it will take us to the container of this particular image. And again, this is like the Docker container registry or the Docker App Store or Docker GitHub. I'm just using public terms to kind of conflate the two. Really, it's just a repository for our build images. And we see some detailed info for this as well. If you want to deploy it, if you want to say pull it, we even get a Docker pull command, which is kind of nice. How do we get all this Docker stuff? Well, there's actually a Docker config file in here. So this is one of the things that I would suggest really checking out. If I were you and I was trying to learn this stuff, I would definitely poke around in here. But you can say, look at the Docker file. And this is just a config file for specifying a Docker image. Let's change the colors. Never going to remember to do that before class ends. But we see, again, this is Docker specific lingo in here. So this is a Node.js version 10. Here's the app directory. Here's our copy commands to bring in everything Node.js package-wise. We want to open up port 8080, and hey, here's how we actually run this thing. Node source / server.js. We ran npm build, and we did basically the same thing. But if you wanted to run this manually, you just say node source server. Okay, pretty straightforward Docker file. Not a whole lot of craziness going on in here. You can make them very, very complicated. But here's how we would specify that, and here's how we know that this is actually a Docker file. Okay, so let's move you back over here. We have our thing up and running, so that's good. Now it's been containerized, it's been pushed. Let's go ahead and deploy it. Now we're going to send it to Cloud Run, which is our platform as a service model. Basically, this thing is what is going to accept code and run it. The infrastructure and the platform is being managed by Google in this case. We could be pushing Python apps, we could be pushing Node apps, Java, C#, whatever we specify in our configuration. The platform is going to manage it by itself. So what do we have to do here? Again, this should feel very familiar if you've done the other labs. gcloud run deploy some image. What's the image? Well, it's that gcr.io address that we had before with the version number. And we're going to allow the platform to manage everything for us. Service name, yes, is monolith, so we're good with the default. I think I hit enter. I did not. We're going to run it in US East 1, so I'm going to pick the zone. If you already set the zone on your terminal, you don't have to do this, but sometimes they ask you, sometimes it just dies without asking you. Yes, we want to allow unauthenticated because we're not setting up a service account or anything like that to run this. Generally, you would want to do that unless this is intentionally a public source. This is going to create a revision up in Cloud Run. So basically, this is going to be reversion 1.0.0. We are going to set our traffic routing. So basically, how we are allowed to access this thing. Our IAM policy is very easy. Anybody can access it. If we were setting one, we would be, again, targeting a service account or an API key or some set of credentials to allow access to this thing. But by the end, we should see that it's up and running. And while this is going, let's go over to Cloud Run. We should see this thing starting to spin up. Yeah, so again, we get information specific to Cloud Run, but it should look pretty similar, right? So the region, unauthenticated, can't speak. And we could drill into this a lot more as well if we want. We could also do a lot of stuff manually, but we're going to use the gcloud commands. So this one will take a few minutes, so I will be back again. So this Cloud Run service has been deployed. Again, we built it with Cloud Build. It was pushed up to the Google Container Registry. We said, Cloud Run, it is time for you to deploy it. It gives us an all is okay. You know, if we wanted to kind of dig into this, we could go into the profiling and debugging tools that we have available to us. But let's go right to our app, and we should see our fancy store up and running, which is delightful. We have a URL that we can access it from, and life is good. So we have our service that has been built. It has been deployed to Cloud Run. We get a URL to access it from, and we have our fancy store. Again, this is just a basic React application. We're deploying the monolith side. Don't care about the microservices right now. But we pulled it from our Cloud Run registry. Life is good so far, right? Now, let's see. This part, make changes. Okay, we are going to actually probably skip the next few steps because we have played around with this in the past. Creating new versions, making changes, updating the website. These are things where basically you would make your tweaks, you would rebuild it, redeploy it, new version number, see your changes. We can set, again, concurrency values is kind of what this page is looking at. And what this is really doing is what is concurrency doing? All right, and we're back. So we're not going to go through and do the rest of these steps here because basically they involve updating the website, redeploying it, giving it a new version number, rebuilding, rerunning, that kind of a thing. You know, what they're doing here is they're changing the concurrency values. So basically how many container requests can be handled at once. And I'll put a link up in our blog post and in the video for how to, you know, kind of handle that if you want to. But for me, this is mainly getting into versioning, and we have done this before. So it's probably not worth your time to go through it again. But I would recommend going through this whole lab if you don't necessarily feel comfortable versioning. I'm not necessarily going to go through these various aspects, but I would definitely recommend that you give it a shot if you want to see what versioning does. Or if you want to play with some of these other values like concurrency, like available downtime. These are all things that we can kind of manage from various aspects of our application. So, I hope this was fun for you. I like code labs that work on the first try because they don't always do that. But I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.